The desert wind carried more than dust through Redemption Creek that autumn evening. It carried the weight of unspoken judgments and the bitter taste of broken dreams. Clara Duval stood at the window of her cramped room above the $silver Saloon, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon. At 28, she'd learned that beauty could be both a blessing and a curse in a town where women like her were seen as necessary evils, tolerated but never truly accepted. She adjusted the emerald green dress that hugged her figure, not too tight to be vulgar, not too loose to be forgotten. In the saloon business, everything was a careful calculation. Clara had mastered the art of being alluring enough to keep the patrons buying drinks while maintaining just enough distance to protect what remained of her reputation. 5 minutes, Clara! Jake hollered from downstairs, his gravelly voice cutting through the thin floorboards. Jake Brennan owned the $silver and treated his girls better than most, which wasn't saying much in Redemption Creek. Clara turned from the window, catching her reflection in the cracked mirror. Green eyes stared back, eyes that had seen too much for someone who'd barely traveled beyond the town limits. She pinned up a stray auburn curl and practiced her stage smile, the one that never quite reached those weary eyes. Redemption Creek sprawled below like a sun-baked scar on the desert floor. It was neither large enough to be important nor small enough to be forgotten. The main street stretched maybe 300 yards, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more than they delivered. The church sat at one end, its whitewashed walls a stark contrast to the weathered wood and adobe that dominated the rest of the town. At the other end, the mayor's house rose 2 stories high, proclaiming his self-importance to anyone who cared to notice. Between these 2 poles of supposed morality and civic authority, the real life of the town pulsed. The general store where Mrs. Watson gossiped more than she sold goods. The bank where old Morrison counted other people's money with arthritic fingers. The sheriff's office where Tom Garrett spent more time with his boots on the desk than patrolling the streets. And, of course, the saloons. 3 of them, where men came to forget their failures and women like Clara helped them do it, one song at a time. Clara descended the narrow stairs, her heels clicking against worn wood. The saloon was already filling with its usual crowd. Cowboys just in from the range, their clothes dusty and their throats parched. Merchants closing shop for the day, looking for conversation and whiskey. A few travelers passing through, their eyes scanning for trouble or opportunity. Sometimes both. She took her place at the small stage near the piano, where Samuel, a freed slave who'd found his way west, was already warming up with a melancholy tune. Samuel nodded at her, a small gesture of solidarity between 2 outcasts who'd learned to make music in a world that barely made room for them. "Evening, gentlemen," Clara began, her voice carrying that practiced blend of warmth and distance. "Let's start with something to chase away the dust." She launched into Red River Valley, a safe choice that wouldn't offend the church folk if word got back, but had enough longing in it to stir the hearts of lonely men. Her voice, rich and clear despite the smoke-filled air, seemed to momentarily transform the dingy saloon into something more. That's when she saw him. He stood just inside the bat-wing doors, silhouetted against the dying light, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that suggested either perfect control or coiled violence, maybe both. The stranger wore trail clothes, nothing fancy, but cleaner than most who'd been riding hard. A week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw, and when he finally stepped into the lamplight, Clara noticed the scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, an old wound, long healed but never forgotten. But it was his eyes that made her voice catch for just a moment, gray as winter steel, holding the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with something broken inside. Those eyes swept the room with military precision, cataloging exits, threats, opportunities, when they landed on her. Clara felt an unexpected shiver despite the warmth of the crowded room. She recovered quickly, professionals always did, and continued her song. But she was aware of him now, standing at the bar, ordering whiskey with a voice low enough that she couldn't make out the words. He didn't drink like the others, throwing it back in desperate gulps. Instead, He sipped slowly, his eyes moving between the mirror behind the bar and the room's reflection. Mayor Aldrich entered then, as he did most evenings, flanked by Sheriff Garrett, both men in their 50s, both grown soft with easy living and the kind of power that small towns afforded small men. Aldrich's belly strained against his brocade vest, an affectation meant to convey prosperity. Garrett's badge caught the lamplight, polished to a shine that his dedication to duty never quite matched. "Evening, Clara," the mayor called out, his voice oily with false familiarity. "Sing something cheerful, won't you? Town needs uplifting." Clara nodded, though she noticed how neither man looked directly at her when they spoke. She was useful, like a good horse or a well-oiled gun, but not quite human enough for real acknowledgement. She shifted to, "Oh, Susanna," injecting false cheer into every note while watching the stranger from the corner of her eye. He'd tensed when the mayor entered. It was subtle, a tightening of his jaw, a slight adjustment of his stance that put his gun hand free. Clara had seen enough men on the edge of violence to recognize the signs, but he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched in that mirror as Aldrich and Garrett found their usual table, where the best whiskey would appear without being asked for, and payment was more suggestion than requirement. The evening wore on. Clara sang. Men drank. Cards were dealt and money changed hands. The stranger nursed his single whiskey for over an hour, speaking to no one, though Jake tried twice to engage him in conversation. Each time, the man responded with just enough words to avoid rudeness, but not enough to invite further inquiry. During her break, Clara stepped out the back door for air. The night had cooled considerably, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The stars above seemed impossibly bright and impossibly distant, like promises that would never be kept. "You sing beautifully." She spun, heart racing. The stranger stood a respectful distance away, having somehow exited through the front and circled around without her noticing. This close. She could see that his eyes weren't just cold. They were haunted. "Thank you," she managed, maintaining her professional composure. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Mr. Kane," he said after a pause. "Elijah Kane." The name meant nothing to her, though something in the way he said it suggested it should, or perhaps it once had, to someone. "Clara Duval." She extended her hand, a gesture both bold and testing. Some men wouldn't shake a saloon singer's hand, as if her profession was contagious. He took it without hesitation, his calloused fingers gentle but firm. "Miss Duval, how long have you been in Redemption Creek?" "All my life," she admitted, then wondered why she'd been honest. Something about this man made her usual deflections seem pointless. "And you, just passing through." Something like that. His gaze drifted toward the main street, where the mayor's house stood outlined against the stars. Though some places have a way of calling you back. Before Clara could ask what he meant, Jake's voice boomed from inside. "Clara, time!" "I should go," she said, though she found herself reluctant to leave. There was something about Elijah Kane that intrigued her beyond his dangerous edges and mysterious manner. Perhaps it was the loneliness she recognized, a different flavor than her own, but no less profound. "Of course." He stepped aside, ever the gentleman despite his rough appearance. "Perhaps we'll speak again." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Clara sang, but her mind kept wandering to the stranger at the bar. He'd moved to a corner table, his back to the wall, still nursing that same whiskey. She noticed things, how he favored his left side slightly, suggesting an old injury, how his hands were scarred not just from ranch work, but from violence, how he watched the mayor and sheriff with the patience of a predator studying prey. Near midnight, as Clara performed her final song, a haunting rendition of Shenandoah that always left the crowd subdued, a commotion erupted near the bar. One of the cowboys, deep in his cups, had taken offense to losing at cards and decided to reclaim his losses at gunpoint. The saloon froze. Sheriff Garrett remained seated, his hand nowhere near his weapon, clearly calculating whether intervention was worth the risk. The cowboy waved his pistol wildly. whiskey courage making him dangerous in his unpredictability. Clara felt rather than saw Elijah Kane rise from his corner. He moved through the crowd like smoke, there and not there, until suddenly he was behind the drunk cowboy. A quick movement, so fast Clara almost missed it, and the gun clattered to the floor. The cowboy followed a second later, unconscious before he hit the sawdust. Kane picked up the fallen weapon, emptied the chambers with practiced efficiency, and set it on the bar. "He'll have a headache come morning," he said to no one in particular, then returned to his table as if nothing had happened. The saloon erupted back to life, nervous laughter replacing tension. Sheriff Garrett finally stood, directing 2 men to carry the unconscious cowboy to the jail to sleep it off. Mayor Aldrich said something about maintaining order, though he'd done nothing to help establish it. Clara finished her song, though her voice trembled slightly on the last notes. When she looked back at Kane's table, he was watching her, and for the first time all evening, something that might have been warmth flickered in those steel-gray eyes. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara made a decision that would later seem like fate, but in the moment felt like mere impulse. She walked to Kane's table, bold as brass, aware of the whispers that followed her. "Thank you," she said simply. He shrugged. "Man shouldn't wave a gun around unless he's prepared to use it, and he shouldn't use it over cards and wounded pride. Still, not everyone would have stepped in. Not everyone has nothing to lose," he replied, and there was that haunted look again. The saloon was nearly empty now. Jake was wiping down the bar, trying to look like he wasn't watching them. Samuel had covered the piano and slipped out the back. Even the mayor and sheriff had retired for the evening. "I should go," Clara said again, though again she didn't want to. Kane stood, a gentleman's gesture that seemed at odds with everything else about him. "Good night, Miss Duval." She turned to leave, then stopped. Later, she would wonder what possessed her. The lateness of the hour? The way he'd moved to protect a room full of strangers? The loneliness she recognized like looking in a mirror? Whatever the reason, Clara Duval did something she'd never done in 7 years of singing in saloons. She stepped close to Elijah Kane, rose on her toes, and pressed her lips to his. It was meant to be quick, a thank you, a moment of connection between 2 lost souls. But when their lips met, something electric passed between them. His hand came up to cup her cheek, gentle despite its scarred roughness. The kiss deepened, speaking of hunger and sorrow, and a desperate need for something neither could name. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Clara's carefully constructed walls had cracked, and from the look in Kane's eyes, she wasn't the only one. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't. "Don't be," he replied, his voice rougher than before. "Just be careful. Clara, this town, the people in it, they're not what they seem." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, moving through the bat-wing doors and into the night. Clara stood alone in the empty saloon, fingers pressed to her lips, wondering what she'd just set in motion. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the desert wind whispered secrets that would soon demand their due. Redemption Creek slept uneasily, unaware that its past had just ridden into town, wearing the face of a man with steel-gray eyes and scarred hands that could deal death or tenderness with equal skill. And in her room, above the saloon, Clara Duval lay awake until dawn, replaying a kiss that tasted of whiskey and promises and something that might have been doom. The morning sun cast long shadows across Redemption Creek as Elijah Kane stood at the window of his room at Morrison's boarding house. He'd chosen this particular establishment for its view. From here, he could see both the mayor's residence and the sheriff's office, as well as the comings and goings on Main Street. Old habits died hard, and surveillance had kept him alive through 5 years of mercenary work along the Mexican border. He hadn't slept. The kiss with Clara Duval had been a mistake, an unexpected complication in a plan that required cold precision. But when she'd looked at him with those green eyes that held their own shadows, when she'd pressed those lips to his, something long dormant had stirred inside him, something he couldn't afford to feel. Not now. Kane studied the town through the dusty glass, mapping routines and weaknesses. Mayor Aldrich emerged from his house at precisely 8 o'clock, just as he had yesterday, making his rounds like a feudal lord surveying his domain, first to the bank, then to the sheriff's office. Finally to the general store where he'd hold court for an hour, accepting tribute in the form of deference and fear. The man had grown fat and comfortable in the 20 years since he'd orchestrated the murder of the Kane family. But Elijah remembered when William Aldrich had been lean and hungry, a small-time land speculator who'd seen opportunity in the aftermath of tragedy. The fire that had claimed Elijah's parents and younger sister had been ruled an accident, a knocked-over lantern in the barn. Only Elijah, who'd been away at the county seat that day, had questioned why his father would have been in the barn at midday, or why the doors had been barred from the outside. Sheriff Tom Garrett appeared next, slouching his way to the office. He'd been Deputy Garrett back then, Aldrich's willing accomplice in covering up the truth. Now he wore the badge, having inherited it when the old sheriff died under mysterious circumstances 10 years ago. Another convenient death in a town that seemed to specialize in them. Kane's jaw tightened as memories threatened to overwhelm him. His mother's laughter, his father's steady hands teaching him to shoot, little Mary's gap-toothed grin, all reduced to ash and unmarked graves, while their murderers prospered. A knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. Kane's hand went instinctively to his coat before he caught himself. "It's open." "Mrs." Morrison entered with a breakfast tray, coffee, biscuits, and beans. A practical woman in her 60s. She'd asked no questions when he'd paid a week in advance in cash. "Fine morning, Mr. Kane," she said, setting the tray on the small table. Her eyes were shrewd but not unkind. "Planning to stay long in Redemption Creek?" "Depends on how my business goes," he replied neutrally. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, if you need anything, just holler. And Mr. Kane, might want to be careful around certain folks in town. Not everyone appreciates strangers asking questions." After she left, Kane wondered what she knew or suspected. In small towns, secrets were currency, and Mrs. Morrison had been here long enough to be wealthy in that regard. He spent the morning walking the town, reacquainting himself with places that existed now only as pale shadows of memory. The old schoolhouse where he'd learned his letters was abandoned, its windows broken and roof caving in. The cemetery sat on a rise outside town, and it was there Kane directed his steps as the sun climbed higher. Finding his family's graves took time. They lay in the paupers section, 3 wooden markers so weathered the names were barely visible. No headstones, no flowers, no evidence that anyone remembered or cared. Kane knelt in the dust, his hand resting on his father's marker. "I'm back, Pa," he whispered. "Took me longer than I promised. But I'm here now. They're going to pay for what they did, every last one of them." The wind stirred, lifting dust devils that danced between the graves. Kane stayed there a long while, letting the rage build inside him like water behind a dam. He'd need that rage to do what must be done. By the time he returned to town, the afternoon was wearing on. He made his way to the Silver Dollar, ostensibly for a drink but really to gather information. Jake Brennan proved surprisingly talkative for a saloon keeper, especially after Kane bought around for the house. "Been here long?" Kane asked casually. 15 years come December. Jake replied, polishing a glass that didn't need it. Bought the place from old Hendricks when he decided California gold was calling his name. Must have seen a lot of changes. Jake snorted. "Changes? Mister, this town don't change. Same people running things, same problems, same solutions. Only thing that changes is who's in the ground and who's walking above it. The mayor seems to have done well for himself." "Aldrich?" Jake's expression soured slightly. "Yeah, he's done real well. Course helps when you know where all the bodies are buried, if you take my meaning." Before Kane could probe further, the door swung open and Clara entered. She wore a simple day dress, blue calico that somehow made her look even more beautiful than her evening finery. Their eyes met, and color rose in her cheeks. Miss Duval, Kane said, touching his hat brim. Mr. Kane. She hesitated, then approached the bar. I wanted to apologize for last night. I was forward. Nothing to apologize for, he said quietly, aware of Jake trying to appear uninterested. Though I meant what I said about being careful. Her chin lifted slightly, pride and defiance mixed. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. Mr. Kane. I don't doubt it, but you don't know. He caught himself. Some storms you don't see coming until it's too late to find shelter. She studied him with those perceptive eyes. Speaking from experience? You could say that. Jake had moved to the other end of the bar, giving them the illusion of privacy. Clara lowered her voice. Who are you really? And don't say just a drifter. Drifters don't move like you do. They don't watch the mayor like they're planning his funeral. Kane considered his options. Telling her nothing would be safest, but something about Clara Duval made him want to be honest, at least partially. I used to live here, a long time ago. I don't remember you, and I know everyone in this town. I was barely 16 when I left. My name was different then. He paused, then added, my family owned land north of town, good land, with water rights. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The old Kane place, but that burned down. She trailed off, the pieces falling into place. You're the boy who survived, Joseph Kane. Elijah. Joseph was my father. The name felt strange on his lips after so many years of being someone else. They said you died too, somewhere back east. They said a lot of things. His voice had gone hard. Not much of it was true. Clara glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. Why come back now? Unfinished business. She was quiet for a moment, then said, the kind of business that ends with gunfire. If necessary. And if I asked you not to? If I said whatever happened in the past should stay buried? Kane met her gaze steadily. Then I'd tell you that some things don't stay buried. They claw their way back up, demanding justice. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the doors opened again, admitting Sheriff Garrett and one of his deputies. The lawman's eyes narrowed when he spotted Kane. Afternoon. Stranger, Garrett said, his casual tone belied by his hand resting on his gun butt. Don't believe we've been properly introduced. Kane, Elijah said simply. Elijah Kane. Did Garrett's face pale slightly, or was it imagination? The sheriff recovered quickly. Planning to stay long? Haven't decided yet. Well, we run a peaceful town here. Don't take kindly to troublemakers. Neither do I, Kane replied mildly. Man wants to drink his whiskey in peace. Maybe catch a hand of cards. Nothing troublesome in that. Garrett held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded curtly. See that it stays that way. After the lawman left, Clara touched Kane's arm briefly. Be careful. Garrett's more dangerous than he looks. I remember, Kane said quietly, and something in his tone made her shiver. That evening found Kane in the back room of the general store, playing poker with a collection of locals. He'd learned long ago that men revealed more over cards than they ever would in straight conversation. By his third hand, he'd identified the town gossip, Frank Miller, the blacksmith, the mayor's information network, 2 merchants who reported everything back to Aldrich, and most importantly, discovered that land records were kept in a vault in the mayor's house rather than the courthouse. Shame about the Hernandez family, Miller was saying as he dealt. Good people. Hate to see them pushed off their land. Mayor says they couldn't prove ownership. One of the merchants said carefully. No proper deed. Convenient how deeds go missing in this town. Another player muttered into his whiskey. Kane filed the information away. So Aldrich was still at it, still stealing land through legal manipulation and intimidation. The pattern was clear for those who looked. Near midnight, Kane made his excuses and left. But instead of returning to the boarding house, he circled through the dark streets to the mayor's residence. The house sat on a double lot, surrounded by a low wall that would pose no challenge. 2 stories, probably 4 bedrooms, with what looked like a study on the ground floor where lamplight still glowed. He memorized the layout, noted the routine of the night watchman every 20 minutes, regular as clockwork, and identified 3 possible entry points. The safe would be in the study. Men like Aldrich always kept their secrets close. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps. Trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. Kane melted into the shadows behind a water barrel, hand on his gun. Clara appeared in the moonlight, wrapped in a dark shawl. She paused at the corner where she must have seen him disappear. "I know you're there," she whispered. "I followed you from the store." Kane emerged, irritated at being tracked but impressed despite himself. Following armed men through dark streets isn't wise, Miss Duval. Neither is skulking around the mayor's house like a thief in the night. "I'm no thief." "No," she agreed. "You're something more dangerous. You're a man with a cause." They stood in the moonlight, the night air cool around them. Finally, Clara spoke again. "There's something you should know. About me. About why I care what happens to you." Kane waited, patient as always. "Aldrich is my father." The words hung between them like a blade. Kane's hand tightened reflexively on his gun butt. "My mother was a saloon girl. Like me," Clara continued, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "When she got pregnant, Aldrich paid her to leave town. She refused, so he destroyed her instead, spread rumors, had her arrested on false charges, drove her to take her own life. I was raised by the church until I was old enough to work." "And you stayed?" Kane couldn't hide his disbelief. "Knowing what he did? Where would I go? This is the only home I've known. And maybe..." She paused, then continued more quietly. "Maybe I stayed because I kept hoping for justice, for someone to finally make him pay for all the lives he's ruined." Kane studied her in the moonlight, seeing her truly for the first time. Not just a beautiful saloon singer, but a woman shaped by the same forces that had forged him. A survivor who'd chosen endurance over escape. "It won't bring them back," he said finally. "Your mother, my family. Justice won't resurrect the dead." "No," she agreed. "But maybe it'll let them rest easier." The watchman's footsteps approached, and they pressed back into the shadows together. Kane was acutely aware of Clara's warmth beside him. The scent of her hair, the rapid beat of her pulse. When the danger passed, neither moved immediately. "This thing between us," Clara whispered. "It can't happen. Not with who we are, what you're planning." "I know," Kane said, even as his hand found hers in the darkness. "But knowing doesn't make it stop. Does it?" "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." They parted then. Clara returning to the saloon, Kane to his boarding house. But both knew something had shifted. The stakes had changed. It was no longer just about vengeance or justice. It was about 2 damaged souls who'd found each other in the darkness, and the terrible possibility that love might bloom in ground poisoned by hate. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. For 3 days after her midnight encounter with Elijah, she'd gone about her routine, singing at the Silver Dollar, shopping at Watson's General Store, attending Sunday service at the whitewashed church, but always with the sensation of eyes following her movements. She wasn't wrong. From his window at Morrison's boarding house, from shadowed doorways, from the far corner of the saloon, Elijah Kane observed her, not with the predatory intensity he reserved for Aldrich and Garrett, but with something more complex, protection mixed with longing, admiration tempered by the knowledge that she was both his greatest weakness and an unexpected ally. But Clara had her own ways of gathering information, skills honed by years of navigating a world hostile to women like her. She listened to the gossip of washerwomen, the complaints of ranchers' wives, the drunken confessions of cowboys. Slowly, she pieced together a fuller picture of what had happened to the Kane family 20 years ago. "Remember that summer?" Mrs. Patterson was saying as Clara selected ribbons at the general store. "Drought was so bad. Only folks with water rights could keep their cattle alive. The Kanes had the best water in the valley." Mrs. Watson added, then lowered her voice. Course, that didn't help them much in the end. Clara pretended to examine a bolt of fabric. I was just a child then. What happened exactly? The two older women exchanged glances. Fire, Mrs. Patterson said simply. Terrible accident. Joseph Kane always was careless with lanterns. Funny how accidents happen to folks who won't sell their land, muttered old Henry Cooper from his chair by the stove. Henry, Mrs., Watson scolded. That's old gossip and you know it. But the seed was planted. Clara made her excuses and left, her mind racing. That evening, she cornered Samuel at the piano before the night's entertainment began. You've been here longer than most, she said quietly. Do you remember the Kane family? Samuel's dark fingers stilled on the keys. That's dangerous ground you're walking, Miss Clara. I know, but I need to understand. He was silent for a long moment, then began playing a slow, mournful tune. Joseph Kane was one of the few white men who treated me like a human being when I first came west. His wife, Mary, she'd bring food to the freedmen's camp, teach the children their letters. His voice dropped. Night of the fire, I was playing at Henderson's place across town, saw the smoke, ran to help. By the time I got there, nothing left but ash and screams. Screams? Samuel's eyes were distant, lost in memory. The boy, Elijah, found him trying to dig through the burning timber with his bare hands, calling for his family. Took 3 men to drag him away. Doc said his hands might never heal proper from the burns. Clara thought of Elijah's scarred hands, the careful way he moved sometimes. Not just gun calluses and hard living, but old burns from a boy who'd tried to save his family. They sent him east to relatives. Samuel continued. Least that's what Aldrich said, but nobody ever heard from him again. Most figured he died of grief, or maybe did himself harm. But he survived, Clara whispered. Samuel's hands froze on the keys. He looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? She realized her mistake too late. I just hoped, I suppose. Such a tragedy. But Samuel wasn't fooled. Miss Clara, if that boy did survive, if he came back looking for answers or revenge, that'd be dangerous for everyone involved, including anyone who showed him kindness. The warning was clear. Clara nodded and moved away, but her mind was made up. She needed more than stories and speculation. She needed proof. That night, after her final song, Clara changed into a dark dress and slipped out of the saloon. The mayor's house, her father's house, though she could never think of it that way, lay quiet under the stars. She'd been inside exactly once, years ago, when Aldrich had summoned her to offer money to leave town. She'd refused, and he'd never acknowledged her existence again. The study window glowed with lamplight. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see Aldrich at his desk, writing in a ledger. Sheriff Garrett sat across from him, and their voices carried faintly on the night air. Getting nervous, Garrett was saying, asking questions about the old records. Let him ask. Aldrich replied, Dead men tell no tales, and there's nobody alive who'd testify against us. What about the documents, the original deeds? Clara pressed closer, straining to hear. Safe where they've always been. Aldrich patted something on his desk, a strongbox. Clara realized, along with enough evidence to hang half the territory if it ever came to light. That's the beauty of mutual guilt. Tom, everybody's hands are dirty. Still don't like it. That stranger, Kane, something about him seems familiar. Aldrich laughed, an ugly sound. You're getting paranoid in your old age. The Kane boy is long dead. I made sure the relatives I sent him to understood he was consumptive, not long for this world. They probably didn't even question it when he disappeared. Clara's blood ran cold. They'd planned it all, even to explaining away Elijah's eventual death. A hand fell on her shoulder, and she barely stifled a scream. Quiet, Elijah whispered, drawing her back into deeper shadows. Guard coming. They crouched behind a cluster of barrel cacti as the watchman made his rounds, lanterns swinging. Clara was acutely aware of Elijah's body pressed against hers, the controlled tension in his muscles, the gun in his hand. When the guard passed, Elijah pulled her to her feet. "What were you thinking?" His voice was rough with suppressed anger. "If they'd caught you—" "I'm trying to help," she interrupted. "You need evidence, don't you? Legal proof of what they did?" "Legal?" He laughed bitterly. "There's no law here except what Aldrich makes. No justice except what a man takes for himself." "Then you're no better than they are," Clara shot back. "Just another killer in a town full of them." His eyes flashed dangerously. "Don't compare me to them. They murdered children. Clara, my sister was 8 years old." The pain in his voice cut through her anger. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And maybe you're right." He holstered his gun, suddenly looking tired. "Maybe I've become the very thing I hate. But what choice do I have? Let them live out their days in comfort, while my family rots in unmarked graves." Clara touched his face gently, feeling the tension in his jaw. "There might be another way. The documents Aldrich mentioned, if we could get them, expose what he's done to everyone. You really think this town would care? Half of them benefit from his corruption. The other half are too scared to stand against him. Then we make them care. We make it impossible to ignore." Elijah studied her in the moonlight. "Why are you doing this? He's your father, whatever else he is." "No," Clara said firmly. "He's the man who destroyed my mother and abandoned me. The only parent I ever had was Father Miguel at the church, and he died 5 years ago. Aldrich is nothing to me but another evil man in a world full of them." Something shifted in Elijah's expression. "You're stronger than you know. Clara Duval. I've had to be." They stood there in the darkness. Two damaged souls united by shared pain and growing attraction. Finally, Elijah spoke. "The strongbox is in his study. I saw it through the window. But the house is too well guarded, and he's paranoid enough to check it regularly. There might be times when he's distracted." Clara said slowly, "The Founders' Day celebration is next week. The whole town will be at the square for the festivities. Aldrich always gives a speech, leads the parade. His house will still be guarded. Not if something happened that required all hands. A fire, perhaps, at the other end of town." Elijah's eyes sharpened. "You're thinking like an outlaw, Miss Duval. I'm thinking like a survivor, Mr. Kane." He pulled her closer suddenly, his hands framing her face. "This is dangerous. If we're caught, then we hang together," she finished. "But at least we'll have tried." The kiss was different from their first, deeper, more desperate, flavored with the knowledge of shared danger. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "I should hate you," Clara whispered. "This was simpler when I thought you were just a mysterious stranger, and I should stay away from you." Elijah replied, "You complicate everything, but you won't." "No, God help me, I won't." They parted ways, but met again the next night, and the next. Sometimes in the shadows behind the church, sometimes in the abandoned schoolhouse where Elijah had once learned his letters. They planned, but they also talked, sharing stories of survival, of loss, of dreams deferred but not quite dead. "After the fire," Elijah told her one night, "I couldn't speak for months, just screamed until my throat was raw. Then nothing. The relatives Aldrich sent me to thought I was simple-minded, made it easier to run away." "Where did you go?" "Everywhere. Worked cattle drives, rode with the cavalry, hired out my gun to whoever paid best, learned to kill without feeling." He paused. "Until I met you. Now I feel everything, and it terrifies me." Clara shared her own darkness, the mother who'd loved her but couldn't fight the shame, the years of being invisible in plain sight, the men who'd tried to take what she wouldn't give and the ones she'd had to hurt to stay safe. "We're quite a pair," she said with bitter humor. "The gunman and the saloon singer, like something out of a dime novel. Those usually end badly," Elijah pointed out, "only because the writers lack imagination." On the 4th night, their restraint finally broke. In the abandoned schoolhouse, surrounded by broken desks and tattered maps of a country that had never kept its promises, they came together with desperate hunger, Clothes were shed along with pretenses, and on a blanket spread over dusty floorboards. They made love with a passion born of shared pain and the knowledge that tomorrow was promised to no one. Afterward, they lay entwined. Clara's head on Elijah's scarred chest, his fingers tangled in her auburn hair. "Run away with me," she said suddenly. "Tonight, we could go to California or Oregon, somewhere nobody knows us." "You know I can't." "Won't, you mean can't," he insisted. "They haunt me, Clara. Every night, I see their faces. If I don't finish this, then they win. They've taken your past and your future. They took everything the night they barred those doors and lit that fire." Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. "And what about us? What about the possibility of something better?" "There is no us," Elijah said quietly. "Not until this is finished. Maybe not even then. You're a fool. Elijah Kane." "Yes," he agreed. "But I'm a fool who loves you." The words hung between them, unexpected and undeniable. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say that unless you mean it. I've never meant anything more in my life." He sat up, cupping her face in his hands. "Which is why I need you to leave town after Founder's Day. Whatever happens, I want you far away." "No. Clara, no!" She pulled away, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't get to make that choice for me. You don't get to say you love me and then send me away like a child. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need—" She stopped, unable to voice what she needed because it was impossible. She needed him whole, needed a future that wasn't shadowed by the past, needed love to be enough to heal wounds that ran bone deep. "After Founder's Day," Elijah said finally. "After I have the evidence and expose what they did, we can talk about the future. If you survive, I'll survive." But they both knew it was more hope than promise. In a week, Redemption Creek would celebrate its founding, and Elijah Kane would attempt to bring down the men who'd built their empire on murder. The odds weren't good. And love, no matter how fierce, couldn't stop bullets or change the past. As dawn crept through the broken windows, they dressed in silence. At the door, Elijah stopped her. "Whatever happens," he said, "know that you brought light into my darkness, even if it was only for a moment." Clara kissed him one more time, pouring everything she couldn't say into that contact. Then she slipped away into the growing light, leaving Elijah alone with his ghosts and his guns and his terrible purpose. But she'd already made her own decision. Come Founder's Day, she wouldn't be running. She'd stand beside the man she loved, even if it meant facing down her own father and the ugly truths he'd tried to bury. Some things were worth the risk, and Elijah Kane, broken and dangerous as he was, had become everything to her. Founder's Day dawned bright and merciless, the desert sun already baking the streets of Redemption Creek by 7 in the morning. The entire town buzzed with preparation. Bunting hung from every storefront. Tables groaned under the weight of food for the communal feast, and children ran wild with the promise of festivities to come. Elijah Kane watched it all from his window, a bitter taste in his mouth. They were celebrating the founding of a town built on blood and lies, dancing on the graves of those who'd been murdered for their land. His hands clenched involuntarily, the old burn scars pulling tight. He'd spent the week preparing meticulously. The abandoned mine shaft outside town now held supplies, rope, oil, matches, everything needed for the distraction that would pull the guards away from Aldrich's house. The timing had to be perfect, too early, and they'd have time to respond before he could get to the strongbox. Too late, and Aldrich might return from the festivities. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Clara entered, and his breath caught. She wore a deep blue dress he'd never seen before, her hair pinned up in elaborate curls. She looked every inch the respectable lady. Not the saloon singer most dismissed her as, "You shouldn't be here," he said, even as his eyes drank her in. "I needed to see you, to try once more." "Don't!" His voice was sharper than intended. "We've been through this." "Yes, we have, and you're still a stubborn fool." She moved closer, and he could smell her perfume, jasmine and something uniquely Clara. But I didn't come to argue. I came to tell you that whatever happens today, I'm with you. Clara, Sheriff Garrett has been asking questions about you. She interrupted. He's suspicious. Jake overheard him talking about sending a telegram to Fort Worth, checking on men matching your description. Elijah absorbed this information. His time was running shorter than anticipated. All the more reason for you to stay clear of this. All the more reason for me to help. She pulled a key from her reticule. This opens the side door to Aldrich's house, the servant's entrance. He stared at the key. How did you... Maria, his housekeeper, her daughter is sick. Has been for months. I've been helping with medicine, food. She thinks I'm finally trying to reconcile with my father. Clara's smile was bitter. Amazing what people will believe when they want to. This is dangerous. Clara, if they realize what you've done, then I'll face the consequences, just like you. She pressed the key into his hand. The door leads to a hallway. His study is the second door on the right. Maria says he'll be gone from 10 until at least 2 for the speeches and parade. Elijah pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I don't deserve you? Probably not, she agreed, her voice muffled against his chest. But you have me anyway. They stayed like that for a long moment. Then Clara pulled back. I need to go. I'm singing at the opening ceremony. She touched his face gently. Be careful. Elijah, please. After she left, Elijah finalized his preparations. He loaded his guns, checked the oil-soaked rags he'd prepared, and waited for the town to empty into the square. By 10 o'clock, Main Street was nearly deserted. The sounds of celebration drifted from the town square. Music, laughter, the boom of Aldrich's voice as he began his speech about civic pride and prosperity. Elijah made his way to the abandoned mine, lit the oil-soaked timber he'd prepared, and watched as smoke began to billow out. Within minutes, someone would notice and raise the alarm. He didn't wait to see it happen, moving quickly but not suspiciously so. He made his way to Aldrich's house. As predicted, the guard who usually stood at the front door was gone, probably enjoying the festivities or soon to respond to the fire alarm. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Elijah slipped inside, every sense alert. The house was quiet, elegant in the way ill-gotten gains could purchase. Paintings on the walls, Turkish carpets on the floors, crystal decanters catching the filtered sunlight. The study door stood open. Elijah entered, immediately spotting the strongbox on a shelf behind the massive desk. It was larger than he'd expected, iron-bound and serious. The lock was complex but not impossible. He'd learned a few things in his travels. As he worked on the lock, his mind wandered to Clara singing in the square, her voice rising above the crowd. Would this be the last time he heard her? If things went wrong, if Garrett had already sent that telegram. The lock clicked open. Inside lay 20 years of secrets, land deeds, not just his family's but dozens of others, all transferred to Aldrich or his associates under suspicious circumstances. Letters discussing removal of obstacles, a ledger detailing bribes, threats, and worse, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a confession written in shaking hand, Deputy Tom Garrett's account of the night they'd burned the Kane family alive, signed and dated. Elijah's hands trembled as he read it. The clinical description of how they'd waited until the family was asleep, how they'd barred the doors, how they'd made sure the fire caught properly, how they'd watched from a safe distance as, I thought it might be you. Elijah spun, gun already in his hand. Sheriff Garrett stood in the doorway, his own weapon drawn but not quite aimed. Yet. Easy now, Garrett said. Let's not be hasty. Hasty? Elijah laughed bitterly. I've waited 20 years. That's the opposite of hasty. You're Joseph Kane's boy. Thought you looked familiar, but it wasn't until Miss Clara started asking questions that I put it together. You've got your father's eyes. I've got his land deed too, Elijah said, not lowering his gun. And your confession. Garrett's face went gray. That was supposed to be burned years ago. Aldrich likes insurance, apparently, even on his partners. Listen, boy, Elijah, what happened to your family was wrong. I know that. I've lived with it every day since. But killing me won't bring them back. No, Elijah agreed. but it might help them rest easier. What about Clara? You kill me. You think she'll thank you for it? You think she wants to love a murderer? The question hit closer than Elijah cared to admit. I'm already a killer. Garrett, made my peace with that years ago. There's a difference between killing in war or self-defense and cold-blooded murder. Your father knew that. It's why he wouldn't sell to Aldrich, even when threatened. Said violence was never the answer. Look where principles got him. They stood frozen. Two men with guns and grievances, the ghosts of the past thick between them. Then, from outside, came the sound of running feet and shouting. The fire had been discovered. Sounds like your distraction worked, Garrett said. Though setting fires seems a bit ironic, given the circumstances. I made sure it wouldn't spread. No innocents will be hurt. Just me and Aldrich. Then, you're not innocent. No, Garrett agreed heavily. I'm not, but I'm tired. Boy, tired of the guilt, tired of the lies. You want justice? Take those documents to the federal marshal in Austin. Let the law handle it. The law? The same law that called my family's murder an accident? Different law? Federal? Aldrich has no reach there. Garrett slowly holstered his weapon, hands visible. I'll testify. Tell them everything. It won't bring your family back, but maybe it'll stop Aldrich from hurting anyone else. Elijah kept his gun trained on the sheriff. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the one who pulled you out of that fire. The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. Fragments of memory, hands dragging him back. A voice saying, not the boy. William, I won't have a child's death on my conscience. You saved me. Only decent thing I did that night. Been trying to make up for the rest ever since. Not that it's possible. Garrett looked old suddenly, worn down by decades of guilt. Let me try to make it right. Elijah, not for me, but for your father. He was a good man. He wouldn't want you to become like us. The front door burst open. Sheriff, there's a fire at the old mine. Deputy Morrison appeared in the study doorway, taking in the scene, Elijah with his gun drawn, the open strongbox, papers scattered across the desk. What's going on here? Garrett made a decision that would change everything. Mister, Kane here was just showing me some documents that were stolen from his family 20 years ago. Seems we've got a problem. Morrison. The deputy's hand went to his gun. Confusion clear on his face. Elijah tensed, ready for violence. Stand down, Morrison, Garrett ordered. This doesn't concern you. Sheriff? I said stand down. Go help with the fire. Make sure it doesn't spread to the town. Morrison hesitated, then left, though Elijah could hear him lingering in the hallway. You've got maybe 10 minutes before Aldrich hears about this, Garrett said. Take the documents and go. Get to Austin. I'll buy you time. Come with me. Testify now. Can't. Soon as I leave, Aldrich will know something's wrong. He's got people everywhere. You'll never make it out of the territory. Garrett moved to the window, peering out. But if I stay, act normal for a few days, give you a head start. He'll kill you when he finds out. Probably. Garrett turned back. But maybe that's justice too. Elijah slowly lowered his gun. Everything in him screamed for vengeance, for blood to answer blood. But Clara's voice echoed in his mind. Then you're no better than they are. He gathered the documents, stuffing them into a leather portfolio from Aldrich's desk. The deed to his family's land, the confession, the ledger, evidence enough to hang them all, if he could get it to the right authorities. Why? He asked Garrett. Why help me now? Because I'm tired of seeing that little girl's face every time I close my eyes. Your sister. She looked right at me through the window as the smoke took her. Been drinking myself to sleep for 20 years trying to forget. Elijah's jaw clenched, fresh rage threatening to overwhelm his fragile control. But he mastered it, thinking of Clara, of the future they might have if he chose justice over revenge. If you betray me, I won't. Got nothing left to lose now anyway. Garrett pulled out his pocket watch. 8 minutes. Go out the back. There's a horse tied behind the smokehouse. Take it. Head for Austin hard and don't stop." Elijah moved toward the door, then paused. "Tell Clara. You tell her yourself when this is over. She deserves that much." With one last look at the man who'd helped destroy his family and then saved his life, Elijah left. He found the horse where Garrett had said, a strong bay that would eat up the miles. As he swung into the saddle, he could hear the town band playing in the distance, the fire bell clanging urgently, the shouts of men organizing bucket brigades. But loudest of all was the memory of Clara's voice, singing about lost love and second chances. He turned the horse toward Austin and didn't look back. Behind him, Redemption Creek continued its celebration, unaware that its foundations were about to crumble. Sheriff Tom Garrett returned to the square, playing his part for a few more days, knowing his life was forfeit but finding a strange peace in the decision. And at the edge of the crowd, Clara Duval finished her song, her eyes searching for a man who was already gone, riding hard toward either justice or death, carrying the seeds of the town's destruction in a leather portfolio soaked with 20 years of blood. The fire at the mine was contained within an hour. Nothing but Elijah Kane's distraction. But the real fire, the one that would consume Aldrich's empire and rock the territory, had just been lit. And this time, the innocent would survive while the guilty burned. At least, that was the hope that drove Elijah Kane through the desert heat, racing against time and the devils that pursued him. Whether he would live to see justice done, whether Clara would forgive him for leaving without a word, whether redemption was possible for any of them, all that remained to be written in the dust and blood of the days to come. The desert tried to kill him 3 times before he reached Austin. First came the sandstorm on the second day, rising from the horizon like a brown wall of fury. Elijah wrapped his face, turned the bay horses back to the wind, and endured. When it passed, he was 5 miles off course and the horse was favoring its left foreleg. Then the Apache hunting party found him camped in a dry wash. 3 braves, young and eager for glory. Elijah's hand went to his gun. But something in their faces, the same hunger for justice he carried, made him pause. He showed them empty hands, shared his water, and they let him pass. One even pointed toward a spring he wouldn't have found otherwise. The 3rd time was his own body betraying him. The old lung weakness from the smoke he'd inhaled 20 years ago flared up in the desert heat. He coughed blood onto the sand, dark spots dancing in his vision, and for a moment considered how fitting it would be to die here, unknown and unmourned. But Clara's face rose in his mind, and he forced himself back into the saddle. He'd left her without a word, without goodbye. The least he could do was survive long enough to see justice done. Meanwhile, in Redemption Creek, Clara discovered his absence when Jake handed her a letter left at the bar. "My dearest Clara," it read in Elijah's careful script. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Sheriff Garrett gave me a chance at justice that doesn't require more blood. I'm taking it. Don't try to follow. If things go well, I'll return. If not, know that the days with you were worth 20 years of darkness. Forgive me. E." Clara crumpled the letter, rage and hurt warring in her chest. How dare he make this choice for her? How dare he leave her behind like some delicate flower needing protection? "Bad news?" Jake asked carefully. "Mr. Kane has left town," she said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "Probably for the best. Man like that brings trouble." Clara turned on him, eyes blazing. A man like what? Jake? Someone who seeks justice? Someone who refuses to bow to corruption? Yes, how terrible. Jake raised his hands in surrender. "Meant no offense. Clara, just worried about you is all." She softened slightly. Jake had been kind to her over the years. "I know. I'm sorry. I just—" She couldn't finish. How could she explain the hole Elijah's absence left? 2 days later, Sheriff Garrett appeared at her door, hat in hand. "Miss Clara, might I come in?" She let him enter warily. Garrett looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept since Founder's Day. "I know you and Kane were close," he began awkwardly. "Wanted you to know he got away clean. Took the evidence that should see justice done. Evidence you helped him steal? Garrett met her gaze steadily. Evidence of crimes I participated in? Yes. Clara studied him. This man who'd worn a badge while harboring murder in his past. Why are you telling me this? Because when Aldrich figures out what happened, and he will soon, things are going to get ugly. You should leave town, Miss Clara, tonight if possible. I'm not running. Your father. He's not my father. Clara snapped. He's the man who destroyed my mother and left me to fend for myself. Nothing more. Blood is blood, whether we like it or not. And when he learns you helped Cain, how would he learn that? Garrett's silence was answer enough. Someone had seen something, heard something. In a town like Redemption Creek, secrets had a short life. I'm not running, Clara repeated. This is my home. Then God help you, Garrett said quietly. Because I can't, not anymore. He left, and Clara barred the door behind him. That night, she sat by her window, watching the street, her father's Derringer loaded and ready in her lap. But the attack she expected didn't come. Not yet. The blow fell 2 days later in broad daylight. Clara was returning from the general store when Mayor Aldrich himself stepped out of the alley, flanked by 2 hired guns she didn't recognize. Not locals, men with dead eyes and tied-down holsters. Daughter, Aldrich said, the word dripping with irony. We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss. Oh, but we do. You see, Sheriff Garrett has disappeared. Very mysterious. And certain valuable documents have gone missing from my home. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Clara kept her expression neutral. Why would I? Because you've been seen with that drifter Cain. Because Maria, my housekeeper, mentioned your sudden interest in reconciliation. Because you're your mother's daughter, beautiful, treacherous, and ultimately stupid. The insult to her mother made Clara's hand itch for the Derringer in her pocket. But the hired guns were watching, eager for an excuse. I don't know what you're talking about, she said evenly. Aldrich smiled, a cold expression that never touched his eyes. No? Then you won't mind if we search your room. Question your associates. Search away. You'll find nothing because there's nothing to find. We'll see. He stepped closer, and Clara forced herself not to retreat. But let me be clear. Daughter, if I find out you betrayed me, blood won't save you. Your mother learned that lesson. Don't make me teach it again. They searched her room that afternoon, tearing apart everything she owned. They found nothing because Clara had burned Elijah's letters the night Garrett warned her. But the violation of her space, the destruction of her few precious possessions, made clear what her life would be until this was resolved. That night, someone threw a rock through her window with a note attached. Traitors hang. At the Silver Dollar. Jake reluctantly informed her that he couldn't afford trouble with the mayor. She could finish out the week. But then, I understand, Clara said quietly. 7 years of work, gone because she dared to love a man seeking justice. But worse was coming. Samuel found her after her last performance, pulling her into the shadows behind the saloon. They're planning something, he whispered urgently. Heard Aldrich talking to those gunmen. Tomorrow night, they mean to make an example of you. Murder? Worse. Maybe. Heard them laughing about teaching you your place, about what happens to women who forget themselves. Clara's blood went cold. She knew what that meant, had seen it happen to other women who crossed powerful men. Death might be kinder. You need to run, Miss Clara, tonight. No. The word came out fiercer than she intended. I won't be driven from my home by that monster. Not again. Then what will you do? Clara thought of Elijah, somewhere in the vast Texas territory, carrying documents that could bring down an empire. She thought of her mother, driven to despair by the same man who now threatened her. She thought of all the years of careful distance, of survival at any cost. I'll fight, she said simply. She spent the night preparing. The Derringer wouldn't be enough. So she traded her mother's jewelry, the only valuable thing Aldrich had ever given her, for a shotgun and shells from a traveling merchant who asked no questions. She barricaded her door, pushed her dresser against the window, and waited. They came at midnight. Clara heard them on the stairs, trying to be quiet but betrayed by the creaking wood. She stood behind her makeshift barricade, shotgun steady in her hands. The door exploded inward, kicked open by one of the hired guns. Clara fired. The shotgun's roar deafening in the small space. The man flew backward, clutching his shoulder, screaming. "The bitch has a gun!" someone shouted. "Of course I do," Clara called back, reloading with hands that barely trembled. "Did you think I'd make it easy?" More men crowded the stairway. Clara fired again, this time over their heads, showering them with plaster. In the confusion, she heard Aldrich's voice. "I want her alive. She knows where Kane went." That's when Clara realized her true value. They thought she knew Elijah's destination, his plans. It might be the only thing keeping her from a shallow grave. "You want to talk, Aldrich?" she shouted. "Then call off your dogs." Silence. Then, "You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I've got 12 more shells and nowhere to go. How many men are you willing to lose?" It was a bluff. She had 4 shells left, but they didn't know that. After whispered consultation, Aldrich called out, "What do you want? Safe passage out of town? A horse and supplies? You let me go, and I disappear forever." And in exchange, Clara hated herself for the lie, but survival demanded it. "I'll tell you where Kane was heading, but only after I'm clear of town." More whispering. Then, "Come out. We'll talk terms. I'm comfortable here. Don't test me, girl. I could burn you out like—" He stopped, perhaps realizing the comparison he'd almost made. "Like you burned the Kanes." Clara finished. "Yes, why don't we discuss that? I'm sure the whole town would love to hear the details. You know nothing. I know enough. And if you kill me, Kane will make sure everyone else knows too." It was a standoff. And Clara knew she couldn't maintain it forever. But she didn't need forever. Just long enough. Because what none of them knew, what she'd only learned from the traveling merchant who'd sold her the shotgun, was that Elijah Kane had reached Austin. The federal marshal had the documents. Even now, a company of cavalry was riding hard for Redemption Creek. Justice was coming, delayed by 20 years but finally approaching on horseback. Clara just had to survive until it arrived. "I'll give you until dawn," Aldrich finally said. "Then we burn you out, and damn the consequences." The men retreated, though she could hear them taking positions around the building. Clara slumped against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. She'd bought time, but at what cost? And would it be enough? Outside, storm clouds gathered, promising rain in the desert. Clara checked her remaining shells, said a prayer to her mother's memory, and prepared for the longest night of her life. In Austin, unaware of Clara's peril, Elijah Kane stood before a federal judge, watching as arrest warrants were signed. In 12 hours, Redemption Creek would face a reckoning. The only question was whether the woman he loved would live to see it. The desert held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. And in a barricaded room above a saloon, Clara Duval held a shotgun and her ground, refusing to be another victim in a town built on victims. Dawn would come, one way or another. She just had to last until then. The night crawled by in increments of fear and defiance. Clara had dragged her mattress to block the window, creating a crude fort in the corner of her room. Every creak of the building made her grip the shotgun tighter. Below, she could hear the hired guns talking, making crude jokes about what they'd do when they finally got their hands on her. At 3 a.m, they tried again. This time, smoke began seeping under her door. They'd set fire to something in the hallway, trying to force her out. Clara stuffed rags under the door, but the smoke grew thicker. Her eyes streamed. Her lungs burned. The ghost of the Kane family fire seemed to mock her predicament. "Getting warm in there. Songbird?" one of the men called. Clara didn't waste breath responding. She crawled to the window, using her last shell to blow out the glass. Fresh air rushed in, but so did bullets from the men positioned outside. She pressed herself flat against the floor as lead whistled overhead. This was it. Then, they'd burn her out or shoot her when she tried to escape. Either way, Aldrich would win again, just as he'd won 20 years ago. "Clara!" The voice came from the alley below. Samuel, invisible in the darkness. "Samuel, get away!" she called back. "Listen, something's happening. Riders coming in from the east. Lots of them." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. Could it be? The smoke was getting thicker. Soon she'd have to choose between bullets and suffocation. She made her decision, wrapping a blanket around herself and preparing to rush the door. Better to die fighting than trapped like an animal. That's when she heard it, the thunder of hoofbeats. Dozens of horses riding hard. Shouts of alarm rose from the street. The federal cavalry had arrived. "Aldrich!" A voice boomed with military authority. "William Aldrich, by order of the Federal Court of Texas, you are under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and fraud." The smoke in the hallway suddenly seemed less important to her captors. Clara heard running feet, confused shouts, the crash of overturning furniture as men fled. She kicked open her door, shotgun ready, but the hallway was empty except for a smoldering pile of rags. Clara stumbled down the stairs and into chaos. Main Street swarmed with blue uniforms. Aldrich stood in his nightshirt, hands manacled, his face purple with rage. Several of his hired guns lay face down in the dirt, others being rounded up by efficient soldiers. "Clara!" She turned to see Elijah swinging down from a lathered horse. He was thinner than when he'd left, his face gaunt and eyes haunted, but alive. Gloriously, impossibly alive. "You came back," she whispered. "I'm sorry." He pulled her against him, heedless of the watching soldiers. "I should never have left you. When we got word of what Aldrich was doing, you got word. Sheriff Garrett, he sent a telegram to Austin before he disappeared. Said you were in danger. Begged us to ride through the night." Elijah's arms tightened around her. "I thought I'd lost you." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Where is Garrett?" Elijah's expression darkened. "We found him 10 miles out of town. Aldrich's men caught up with him. He didn't make it, but he lived long enough to make a full confession to the federal marshal. His testimony will hang Aldrich." Clara felt unexpected sorrow for the sheriff who'd found redemption too late. "He saved me. In the end, he chose justice." "Yes," Elijah agreed quietly. "He did." Around them, the arrest continued. Aldrich was screaming about his rights, about jurisdiction, about influence in high places. The federal captain, a weathered man named Harris, listened with polite disinterest. "Mr. Aldrich," Captain Harris said when the mayor paused for breath. "I have warrants for your arrest signed by a federal judge. I have documentary evidence of multiple murders, including the Kane family. I have sworn testimony from your co-conspirator. And now I have charges of attempted murder of Miss Duval here. You can explain your influence to the court in Austin." "She's nobody," Aldrich spat. "Just a saloon whore who—" Elijah's fist connected with Aldrich's jaw before anyone could stop him. The mayor dropped, blood streaming from his nose. "Mr. Kane," Captain Harris said mildly, "please refrain from assaulting the prisoner. We need him coherent for trial." "Sorry, Captain. Though I understand the provocation." Harris turned to Clara. "Miss Duval, we'll need your testimony about tonight's events. Are you willing to travel to Austin?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "I want to see this through to the end." Dawn broke as they prepared to leave Redemption Creek. Half the town had gathered to watch their mayor being loaded into a prison wagon. Some looked shocked, others satisfied, as if they'd always known, but never dared speak. "Mrs. Watson from the general store pushed through the crowd. "Clara," she called. "Is it true? About the Kanes?" Clara nodded. "All true. 20 years of lies. But the truth finally came out." The older woman's face crumpled. "We should have known. Should have questioned. That poor family." Others pressed forward with similar sentiments, the courage of hindsight making everyone a potential hero. Clara felt only exhaustion and a deep sadness for all the years of willful blindness. Jake appeared with a bundle. "Your things, Clara." What I could save from your room. And this. He pressed a small purse into her hands. Your pay. Plus a little extra. You earned it. Jake, You're a brave woman. Clara Duval. Braver than any of us. Don't let anyone tell you different. As the cavalry formed up to leave, Elijah helped Clara onto a spare horse. Can you ride? I can learn, she said, which made him smile for the first time since his return. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them. Clara didn't look back at Redemption Creek. That chapter of her life was closing. What lay ahead? She didn't know, but she faced it without fear. The journey to Austin took 4 days. Elijah rode beside her, teaching her the basics of horsemanship, sharing stories of his travels, slowly rebuilding the connection that had been strained by separation and violence. I thought about you every mile, he told her one evening as they camped by a stream. Wondered if I was a fool to leave, to choose law over vengeance. You chose justice, Clara corrected. That's different from law, and harder than vengeance. Garrett said something similar, near the end. Elijah stared into the fire. He said my father would be proud. I hope that's true. From what I've learned about your father, I believe it is. They were quiet then, comfortable in each other's presence despite all that had happened. The federal troops gave them privacy, Captain Harris proving to be a romantic at heart beneath his military bearing. In Austin, the trial was swift. Aldrich's own documents condemned him, along with Garrett's dying testimony and Clara's account of recent events. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Clara watched Aldrich's face as the sentence was read. Death by hanging. He'd aged 20 years in 2 weeks, his pompous confidence crumbling into desperate fear. When his eyes found hers in the gallery, she saw not her father, but a pathetic old man who'd built an empire on blood and lost everything. Any last words? The judge asked. Aldrich straightened, some of his old arrogance returning. I did what I had to do, in a lawless land. The strong survive. I have no regrets. Then may God have mercy on your soul. The judge replied, because this court has none. As they led Aldrich away, Clara felt Elijah's hand find hers. It's over, he said quietly. No, she corrected. Now it begins. The hanging took place at dawn 3 days later. Clara didn't attend, but Elijah did, needing to see it finished. He returned to their hotel quiet and subdued. Was it what you expected? Clara asked gently. I expected to feel more satisfaction, maybe, or peace. Instead, I just feel empty. Because you're not like him, Clara said, taking his face in her hands. You're capable of moving past hate. That's not emptiness. Elijah, that's freedom. That afternoon, they stood in the courthouse as a judge restored the Kane family land to its rightful heir. 20 years late, but legal at last. Elijah held the deed with shaking hands. This piece of paper that had cost so much blood and pain. What will you do with it? Clara asked as they walked out into the Texas sunshine. Rebuild, maybe. Make it what my father dreamed, a working ranch, a good life. He paused, uncertain. If you'll help me. Clara stopped walking. Elijah Kane, is that a proposal? It's a question, he said, turning to face her. Will you marry a man with too many scars and a piece of land that's more memory than reality? Will you help me build something new from all this destruction? I've been building from destruction my whole life, Clara said softly. I think I could manage a ranch. He kissed her then, there on the courthouse steps with all of Austin to witness. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. Is that a yes? That's a yes, you fool. They were married a week later by a justice of the peace, with Captain Harris and his wife as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress. She'd never been one for white. And Elijah had shaved and bought a new suit that almost made him look civilized. Their wedding night was spent in the same hotel where they'd stayed during the trial. But this time there were no shadows between them, no secrets or schemes, just 2 survivors who'd found love in the ashes of tragedy, determined to build something better. No regrets? Elijah asked as they lay entwined in the aftermath of passion. Only one, Clara admitted. I wish your family could have known you survived to find happiness. I wish my mother could have seen that her daughter found love despite everything. Maybe they do know, Elijah said softly. Maybe that's what peace feels like, knowing the people we love found their way through the darkness. They left Austin the next morning, heading back to the land that had been stolen and was now returned. Not to Redemption Creek. That town could keep its poisoned name and bitter memories. But to the Kane Ranch, where spring water still ran clear and the soil waited for new seeds. The journey that had begun with a kiss between strangers in a smoky saloon was becoming something neither had dared dream. A future built on love rather than loss. Hope rather than hate. There would be challenges ahead. The ranch was in ruins, the land neglected, the memories still sharp. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. As they rode onto Kane land for the first time in 20 years, Elijah pulled up his horse and dismounted. He knelt in the dirt, pressing his palm to the earth. I'm home, Pa, he whispered. I'm finally home. Clara dismounted beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Together they looked across the valley where a house had once stood, where a family had laughed and loved and died, where they would build again, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it with new life. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of fire that no longer spoke of destruction but of warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow. And in that light, two souls who'd found each other in the darkness began the long, sweet work of healing. The first month on the Kane Ranch tested them in ways neither had anticipated. The old house was nothing but a black scar on the earth. The barn collapsed. The fences rotted away. They slept in a canvas tent while Elijah worked from dawn to dusk, clearing debris and salvaging what little remained. Clara proved herself tougher than her saloon singer past might have suggested. She learned to handle tools, haul water, and cook over an open fire. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, grew calloused, her fair skin burned, then tanned, but she never complained, finding a fierce satisfaction in building something with her own hands. You don't have to work so hard, Elijah told her one evening as she struggled to repair a harness. I can hire help. With what money? Clara asked practically. Besides, this is my land too now. I want to earn it. They were down to their last $20 when unexpected help arrived. Samuel, the piano player from the Silver Dollar, drove up in a wagon loaded with supplies. Figured you could use some things, he said simply, unloading flour, beans, coffee, and tools. Folks in town took up a collection. Town. Elijah's voice was wary. Redemption Creek. What's left of it? Place fell apart after Aldrich was arrested. Half the businesses closed, people moved on, but some stayed, the decent ones. They remember the Kanes kindly. With the supplies came news. Several of Aldrich's accomplices had been arrested, their ill-gotten gains seized. The federal government was conducting a full investigation into land fraud throughout the territory. Families who'd been cheated were getting their property back. Jake wanted you to know the Silver Dollar is closing, Samuel told Clara. But he saved the piano. Said if you ever wanted it. Clara's eyes misted. Tell him thank you, but I'm done with that life. Are you? Samuel studied her shrewdly. You've got a gift, Miss Clara. Shame to waste it. After Samuel left, promising to return with more news, Clara found herself thinking about his words. That night, as she and Elijah sat by their campfire, she hummed an old melody. Sing for me, Elijah said quietly. I've missed your voice. So she sang under the stars, not the practiced performance of the saloon, but something raw and real. Songs of loss and hope, of love, found in unlikely places. Elijah watched her with such tenderness that her voice caught on the final notes. Don't stop making music, he said. Not for me, not for anyone. It's part of who you are. I'm a rancher's wife now? She reminded him. You're Clara Kane, he corrected. You can be anything you want. By the second month, they'd made real progress. A small cabin stood where the old house had burned. Just 2 rooms, but solid in theirs. They'd repaired enough fence to hold a small herd, if they could afford cattle. The vegetable garden Clara planted showed green shoots of promise. That's when trouble found them again. Clara was alone, Elijah having ridden to town for supplies. When 3 riders approached, she recognized one. Rex Morrison, former deputy under Garrett, now wearing a sheriff's badge. The other 2 were strangers with hard faces and ready guns. Mrs. Kane. Morrison touched his hat brim mockingly. Or should I still call you Miss Duval? Sheriff Morrison. Clara kept her voice steady, though her hand inched toward the rifle propped by the door. What brings you out here? Just checking on new settlers, making sure everything's legal. You know it is. The federal judge confirmed my husband's ownership. Federal judge? Morrison spat tobacco juice near her garden. Federal government needs to mind its own business. This is still Texas, and in Texas, we handle things our own way. One of the other men laughed. Heard your husband killed Sheriff Garrett. That true? Sheriff Garrett died helping bring a murderer to justice. Clara said firmly, My husband was in Austin when it happened, as the federal marshals can attest. Convenient, Morrison sneered. Just like it's convenient how you inherited all this land, a saloon singer marrying into property. Some might call that suspicious. Clara's temper flared. And some might call you a corrupt fool who learned nothing from Aldrich's fate. But I'm too polite to say so. Morrison's face darkened. Watch your tongue, woman. Your husband's not here to protect you. I don't need protection, Clara said, finally grasping the rifle. I've been taking care of myself longer than you've worn that badge. Now get off our land. Our land, Morrison repeated. Listen good, Mrs. High and Mighty Kane. Maybe the Federals gave you papers, but this is still our territory. Accidents happen on isolated ranches. Fires start, cattle disappear. Sometimes people disappear too. Is that a threat, Sheriff? It's a friendly warning. This land carries a curse. Ask the Kanes. Oh, wait, you can't. He wheeled his horse around. Be smart. Clara, sell out and leave while you can. After they left, Clara's hands shook as she loaded both their guns and barricaded the door. When Elijah returned at sunset, she was still standing guard. His face went cold as she told him about Morrison's visit. I should have expected this. Aldrich is gone, but his poison remains. We can't fight the whole territory. Elijah, we won't have to. He pulled her close. Morrison's a coward playing at being dangerous, but we'll be ready if he tries anything. They were careful after that. One of them always stayed near the cabin. They slept in shifts, guns within reach. But weeks passed with no further trouble, and gradually they relaxed their vigilance. That's when the fires started. The first was small, a haystack that caught one windy night. They fought it together, hauling water from the creek, and saved most of the hay. Elijah found no obvious cause, but the smell of kerosene lingered. The second fire took their tool shed. This time, they found tracks. 3 horses, matching Morrison's visit, but tracks weren't proof, and the nearest federal marshal was 100 miles away. They're trying to burn us out, Clara said, exhaustion and anger warring in her voice. Just like they did your family. No. Elijah's jaw set with determination. This time, we fight back. He rode out that night, despite Clara's protests. When he returned near dawn, his expression was grim but satisfied. What did you do? Clara asked. Paid Morrison a visit, explained that if anything else burns on our land, his house might accidentally catch fire too. Amazing how flammable wood structures are. Elijah, I won't let them drive us off. Clara, not with threats, not with fire, not with anything. For a week, there was peace. Then Clara woke to find their garden trampled, their water barrel shot full of holes, and a note nailed to their door. Last warning. That afternoon, unexpected allies arrived. 5 riders approached, former ranch hands who'd worked for Elijah's father, led by a grizzled man named Cooper. Heard you were having trouble. Cooper said without preamble. "We remember your PA, boy. Good man. Fair. We've been waiting 20 years for a Kane to come home." "I can't pay much," Elijah warned. "Didn't ask for pay. We're asking for work and a chance to settle scores. Morrison's been squeezing ranchers all over the county. Time someone stood up to him. With help, everything changed. The cabin became a proper house. Fences spread across the land. They bought cattle with a loan from an Austin bank that recognized the value of federal protection. And Morrison's harassment stopped, faced with armed men who wouldn't be intimidated. Clara found her place in this new life. She managed the household, learned veterinary skills from Cooper, and in the evenings, sang for the hands around the campfire. It wasn't the silver dollar, but the appreciation was more genuine. One night, as autumn approached, she felt the first flutter of life in her belly. She'd suspected for weeks but hadn't been sure. Now, with that tiny movement, the future took new shape. She found Elijah checking the horses, his movements sure and confident. He'd grown into this life, the shadows in his eyes replaced by purpose. "Elijah," she called softly. He turned, immediately alert to something in her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "Everything's about to be right." Understanding dawned slowly, transforming his face. Yes, come spring, there'll be a new Kane on this land." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and protested. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. "I never thought—" He stopped, overwhelmed. "After everything, to have this chance. Your parents would be happy." Clara said softly, "New life where there was death. Hope where there was despair." That night, they stood where the old house had burned, looking at stars that seemed especially bright. "Do you think they know?" Elijah asked. "My family. Your mother. Do you think they can see what we've built?" Clara leaned into his warmth. "I think love doesn't die, even when people do. It just changes shape, finds new ways to grow. Like this child, carrying forward what came before while creating something new." Inside her, the baby moved again, as if agreeing. The land that had known such sorrow would know joy again. The cycle of vengeance had broken, replaced by the promise of new beginnings. But first, there were still battles to fight. Morrison hadn't given up, just grown quieter. Other challenges waited. Drought, disease, the endless work of building a ranch from nothing. And somewhere in Texas, other victims of men like Aldrich were finding courage to reclaim what was stolen. Clara and Elijah would face it all, together. They'd already survived the worst: loss, loneliness, the temptation of hatred. What came next, they'd handle with the same determination that had brought them this far. As they walked back to their house, their home, Clara began to hum. Soon she was singing, her voice carrying across the land that would know music again. Elijah joined in, his rough baritone harmonizing with her clear soprano. In the bunkhouse, Cooper smiled at the sound. "That's what this place needed," he told the other hands. "Life, music, hope. The Kanes are truly home, and in Redemption Creek, or what was left of it." Sheriff Morrison listened to reports of the Kane Ranch's prosperity with growing anger, but also with growing fear, because word was spreading. The federal government was interested in his activities too. The story of the Kane Ranch was becoming legend, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, seek justice. One couple's refusal to be broken was creating ripples that would spread far beyond their boundaries. But that night, Clara and Elijah knew only the peace of the moment, their love, their land, their future growing inside her. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Winter came hard to West Texas that year, bringing snow that turned the landscape into something Clara had never seen. Pristine, white, and deceptively peaceful. She was heavy with child now, moving carefully through the daily tasks that kept the ranch running. The threat from Morrison had evolved into something more insidious. No more fires or vandalism, but cattle disappeared. Bills came due from debts they hadn't incurred, and mysterious legal challenges appeared regarding water rights and boundary lines. "He's trying to bleed us dry," Elijah said one evening, studying a stack of legal papers. "Death by 1,000 cuts instead of a bullet." "Then we need help," Clara said firmly. "Real help, not just Cooper and the boys with guns." That help came from an unexpected source. Theodore Blackwood, attorney at law, arrived from San Antonio in a dusty carriage, clutching a letter of introduction from Captain Harris. "The captain thought you might need legal assistance," Blackwood explained, adjusting his spectacles. A thin man in his 40s, he looked more suited to libraries than the frontier. "I specialize in land disputes and have a particular interest in cases involving corruption." "We can't afford," Elijah began. "Captain Harris has arranged my fee. Consider it the federal government's investment in justice." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Besides, I have my own reasons for wanting to see men like Morrison brought down. They give law a bad name." With Blackwood's help, they began fighting back through the courts. Every false claim was challenged, every forged document exposed. Morrison had grown careless in his greed, leaving a paper trail that led back to him and several other former associates of Aldrich. But Morrison wasn't finished. On a cold February morning, Clara was drawing water from the well when she heard horses approaching. Many horses. She hurried inside, calling for Elijah, but he'd already heard. Morrison rode at the head of 15 men, all armed, all wearing makeshift deputy badges. "Elijah Kane," he shouted. "Come out. I have a warrant for your arrest." "On what charges?" Blackwood emerged from the house, papers in hand. Morrison sneered. "Cattle rustling. We found Kane's brand on stolen stock." "Impossible," Clara said. "Our cattle are all accounted for." "Are they?" Morrison smiled coldly. "Because I have witnesses who saw Kane rebrand Circle J cattle with his mark." It was a lie, but a clever one. In frontier justice, cattle rustling was a hanging offense, and Morrison had stacked the deck with his own men as witnesses. "I'll need to see this warrant," Blackwood said calmly. "You'll see it at the trial, if there is one." Morrison's hand moved to his gun. Rustlers sometimes try to escape. Tragic when that happens. Clara felt the baby kick hard, as if sensing danger. She moved closer to Elijah, who stood tense and ready. Cooper and the ranch hands had emerged from the bunkhouse, guns visible but not drawn. "There's another way," a new voice called out. Everyone turned to see a lone rider approaching from the east. As he drew closer, Clara gasped. It was Judge Samuel Patterson from Austin, the same man who'd sentenced Aldrich to hang. "Judge Patterson." Morrison's confidence wavered. "What brings you out here?" "Justice, Sheriff, something you seem to have forgotten." Patterson dismounted, his movements deliberate. "I received some interesting telegrams about your activities. Thought I'd investigate personally. This is a local matter. Corruption is never just a local matter." Patterson pulled out official documents. "Sheriff Morrison, you're relieved of duty pending investigation. These federal marshals," he gestured as more riders appeared on the horizon, "will ensure a smooth transition." Morrison's face went purple. "You can't." "I can, and I have. Unless you'd prefer to discuss the bribes you've taken, the false arrests, the intimidation of citizens." Patterson's voice was steel. "Mr. Blackwood has been very thorough in his documentation." The standoff stretched taut. Morrison's men looked uncertain, caught between loyalty and the reality of federal intervention. Finally, Morrison spat in the dust. "This isn't over, Kane." "Yes," Elijah said quietly. "It is." As the federal marshals led Morrison and several of his men away, Judge Patterson approached Clara and Elijah. "Captain Harris sends his regards. He's been keeping an eye on things here. Wanted to make sure Aldrich's poison was fully cleaned out." "We're grateful," Clara said, one hand on her belly. "More than you know." Patterson's stern face softened. "When is the child due?" "Next month, God willing." "Then I'm glad we could resolve this before then. Children should be born into peace, not conflict." That night, for the first time in months, they slept without weapons at hand. The house felt different, lighter, as if a shadow had finally lifted. Clara sang as she prepared dinner, and Elijah actually laughed at something Cooper said. "It's really over." Clara marveled as they lay in bed. "We're free. Free to build the life we want." Elijah agreed, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. "Free to raise our child without fear." The baby came early, during a late-season storm that turned the world white and wild. Clara labored for hours while the wind howled, Elijah beside her, the midwife from town coaching them both. When their son finally arrived, screaming and perfect, the storm broke. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything golden. "Joseph," Clara whispered, cradling the baby. "Joseph Samuel Cain, for your grandfather and the man who helped save us." Elijah couldn't speak, too overwhelmed by the tiny life they'd created. This child would know only love and safety, would grow up on land that was truly theirs, would never question his right to exist and thrive. Word spread quickly. Within days, gifts arrived from unexpected sources. The remaining decent folks from Redemption Creek sent baby clothes and blankets. Captain Harris sent a silver rattle from Austin. Even some of Morrison's former deputies, freed from his influence, came to pay respects and apologize. Samuel arrived with the piano from the Silver Dollar, loaded carefully in a wagon. "Every home needs music," he said simply, "especially one with a baby." Clara hugged him tearfully. That night, she played for the first time in months, soft lullabies that made little Joseph stop fussing and stare with wide, dark eyes. Spring brought more changes. The ranch prospered, cattle multiplying, crops growing strong. They hired more hands, including several Mexican families who'd been cheated by Aldrich and were finally getting their own land back. The Cain Ranch became a symbol of what was possible when justice prevailed. Theodore Blackwood stayed on, setting up practice in the nearest town and helping other victims of corruption. "You've started something," he told Elijah. "People are standing up across the territory, demanding their rights. The old ways are dying." "Good riddance," Elijah said, watching his son sleep in Clara's arms. On Joseph's first birthday, they held a celebration that brought people in from miles around, the yard filled with neighbors, friends, former enemies who'd become allies. Clara sang while Samuel played piano, their music floating across land that had known too much silence. "Look what love built," Clara told Elijah as they watched their guests dance. "From ashes and hate, look what grew." "A miracle," he agreed, pulling her close. "You're my miracle." Clara Cain. As sunset painted the sky, an old woman approached. Maria, Aldrich's former housekeeper. She pressed a small box into Clara's hands. "This was your mother's," Maria said quietly. "Mr. Aldrich made me put it away, but I kept it, though you should have it now." Inside was a simple gold locket with a photograph, a young woman who looked remarkably like Clara, eyes full of dreams not yet broken. "Thank you," Clara whispered, clasping the locket around her neck, another piece of the past reclaimed, transformed from sorrow to remembrance. The party continued late into the night, but Clara and Elijah slipped away to the hill where the old house had stood. Their new home glowed with lamplight below, filled with music and laughter. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "The life we might have had if we'd run away that night. California, Oregon, somewhere without all this history?" "No," Elijah said without hesitation. "This is where we belong, where our children will belong. We didn't just reclaim land, Clara. We reclaimed the right to live without fear, to build something lasting." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the gentle strength that had carried them through so much. "I love you, Elijah Cain. And I love you, Clara Cain, forever and always." Below them, music drifted on the night air, Samuel's piano, Cooper's fiddle, voices raised in celebration. The Cain Ranch was alive again, filled with the future instead of haunted by the past. In her arms, little Joseph stirred, reaching for the stars that seemed close enough to touch. Clara sang softly, a new song about love that conquered fear and hope that bloomed in desert places. Elijah wrapped his arms around his family, complete, safe, home. The boy who'd lost everything had become a man who'd gained more than he'd ever dreamed possible. The saloon singer who'd lived on the margins had found her place at the center of something beautiful and lasting. Together. They'd written a different ending to the story. Not the tragic tale of the Cain family's destruction, but the triumphant saga of their resurrection. Love had proven stronger than hate, justice more enduring than corruption, and hope more powerful than despair. As they walked back to their home, Clara began planning. There would be more children to fill the rooms, more music to fill the air, more life to fill the land. The Cain Ranch would be a beacon of what was possible when people refused to let darkness win. Behind them, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, bearing witness to the truth that some loves are strong enough to change the world, one heart at a time, and in the warmth of their home, surrounded by friends who'd become family. Clara and Elijah Cain continued building their happily ever after, one precious day at a time. The desert bloomed around them, proof that even the harshest ground could nurture beauty when tended with love. And somewhere in the Texas night, the ghosts of the past finally found their peace, knowing that justice had been served and love had triumphed in the end. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the Old West. I hope Clara and Elijah's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Where are you listening from? Please leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as our characters connected across their trials. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage and romance from America's frontier days. Share your thoughts about Clara and Elijah's story. What moment moved you most? Your engagement helps these stories reach more listeners who love the drama and passion of the Wild West. Until next time, partners.